So I'm now recording. Fallview Library has just joined us. This is the Hydra Code Club, which is a Samba-based code reading group. And today we are going to be looking at the Universal Code with Ed Silverton. Thank you so much for joining us. This is usually a pretty casual process where whoever's leading the code read will share the screen with the rest of us, and usually we'll quickly review like a Readme to get a general sense of a project. I think we probably mostly all know what Universal Viewer is about. And then just sort of find a place to jump in and start exploring the structure of the code and the implementation details where we start to get curious, and a lot of just discussion. Anybody who wants to chime in and ask a question or notice a thing will do so, and it's just a friendly group. So I hope nobody feels too formal today, considering that we're recording. But I'm going to turn it over to you, Ed. We're really excited to have you here to show us around Universal Viewer. And you should see a share screen button in the bottom there.
Okay.
Yeah, great.
Thanks for inviting me. Looking forward to it.
Awesome.
So you said you usually start with a Readme, so maybe that makes sense to start there. So this is the Universal Viewer GitHub organization. So GitHub seems to think jQuery is a vulnerable dependency. I can see that at the moment. I just dismiss that. Anyway, I'm pretty sure jQuery isn't a vulnerable dependency. Well, maybe you guys could tell me what you think about that.
Yeah,
so,
I don't know that on any of my code bases about jQuery, but maybe I should double check.
Maybe it's worth updating to the latest jQuery. I don't feel like it's a big issue right now, but I should probably look into it. So this is our README. I think all these sort of usual failing badge buttons. So this FOSSA status one is a recent addition where it kind of scans all the packages or your node modules to see if they pass a certain criteria for whether or not the project is open source enough. If there's any kind of GPL things in there, or it warns you about it, which I quite like. And we've got like that. Whether or not it builds on Travis, and we've got an open collective now as well, where we've got a couple of sponsors as well, which is great because that gives me a couple of days a month to kind of try and catch up with GitHub issues and things like that. And so far, it's working pretty well. So yeah, and then we've got all our kind of contributors. These are the various institutions who've contributed over the years. The project's been going since 2012, I believe, which is kind of scary. I have to remind myself how long it's been going. So yeah, the usual kind of setup guide. I'm using Grunt to build it, which is based on Node.js and everything. Ideally, I'd like to kind of move off of Grunt at some point to just use plain kind of Node.js scripts, so like npm scripts. I don't really. I started using Gulp on other projects, and I actually found myself missing Grunt because I found myself jumping through hoops to make Gulp work like Grunt because it's kind of asynchronous nature. While faster, I found it difficult to reason about because if things aren't happening in a consistent sort of sequence, I found it difficult to. So then I moved off Gulp and onto npm scripts, and then once you're into that, you're thinking, well, why do I need any kind of task runner? So anyway, that's probably a future thing I'll look at. So yeah, you can do debug builds and this sort of builds of it. The debug build gives you unminified code that you can kind of look at in DevTools and debug easily. And then the distribution build kind of uglifies everything, so it's unreadable, but it's a lot smaller. And then we have this examples task that will run the project. So after you've cloned it and you've gone through these steps, which are now much more simple than in previous versions of the UV. I've tried to kind of make it as easy as possible now. So there's no kind of like extra kind of, you have to manually sync your node modules and things like that. It should all just happen seamlessly. Yeah, so when you clone it, you have to clone it recursively. So that's to get the examples submodule. There used to be 2 submodules, one for tests as well, and we got rid of that recently, but we're kind of trying to get a good test suite built. But the way the UV works is that it's kind of very project driven. I'm working for Stanford at the moment, doing some things for them, and then I'll be back on the British Library again, and they've got specific things that they want. And now that we have the Open Collective, it might be, and also we have a conference coming up, UVCon, about a month's time. So that's going to be an opportunity to try and increase the awareness of the need for something like a test suite, a really good solid test suite. So at the moment, because the Universal Viewer is written with TypeScript, I'm a big fan of TypeScript. I actually adopted it for the Universal Viewer just as it came out in, I think it was around about 2012. So I knew that the kind of type system would be useful to kind of, you can lean on the compiler and it will catch a lot of errors for you. And that's, over time, I think that's, that's been borne out. There's an advantage of the project that we can refactor it sometimes quite drastically, and TypeScript kind of catches all of your errors. And very recently, I turned on some more sort of strictness in the compiler options to catch even more classes of errors, such as it won't allow any kind of nulls anywhere that haven't been treated as such. So if something can be null, you have to kind of, the compiler will say, wait a minute, this could be null here, and you're calling x dot property, and that will throw a runtime exception. So it won't allow any situations like that to occur, which is, I found, has made the code base a lot more robust. So we've got this example sub-repository, which you can see here. And this has a GitHub Pages branch. I need to clean up some of these old branches, actually. So what you're seeing in here, specifically this index.html, that is what you see when you go to universalviewer.io/examples. So when you build the UV, either like a debug or a distribution build, let me show you here. So I use Visual Studio Code. It's my sort of favorite IDE, actually built in TypeScript, funnily enough. So you can see that we've got the project here, sort of cloned and sort of set up. And you can see the examples repository. So when I do a build, if I Control-Shift-B. That will do a dev build. You can see it all kind of. I can't actually see because of the zoom thing. So it's kind of running through all the various tasks, running the TypeScript compiler, copying files, replacing strings in files where necessary, and building the themes and things like that. So that's now built into this examples folder here. So it creates the UV folder, and that's got all your that's got uv.js in it and various bits and pieces. And then the indexed HTML in examples uses that. So and you can see where the files are being kind of included here. uv.js itself is at the bottom. It's a good idea to do that because when the UV loads, it fires a UV loaded event, and that can, if that happens, if you put the script in the head, then the UV loaded event is going to occur before the DOM is ready, which can cause all sorts of problems. So it's better to just put it at the bottom of the page. So yeah, so if I look at localhost, so I've run grunt examples. Let's see, I just terminate this process here. So I'm in Universal Viewer here on my hard disk. So if now I've stopped that process, if I refresh this, I don't get anything. So if I run examples, that'll start the server again. So, and then because we're on the dev build, we can see all the, sorry?
Ed, can I just ask a question?
Yep.
When you run the build, it puts it inside the examples directory?
Yeah.
Okay.
So and the examples directory has a GitHub Pages branch, which is what. So when you go to universalviewer.io/examples, that is what you're seeing.
I see. So usually that's what you want to do to refresh that GitHub Pages.
Yeah, exactly. So when I do a kind of a release on npm, I do a dist build and an npm publish, and then so the examples repository has the other function of being where npm looks for the universal viewer. So when you do an npm install universal viewer, it gets it from there.
Okay.
And you can see there's a package.json in here in examples that kind of defines that as the current version, and it's pretty simple, really. So when we're running the examples repository on localhost, we've done a dev build, we've got access to all the kind of JavaScript files to sort of debug. So the kind of general process is, so if we're in index.html in examples, we're including sort of UV helpers and UV lib offline and uv.js itself down at the bottom. So helpers is just why isn't that there? I should be there. Maybe you didn't copy. Yeah, strange. So this is helpers. And this kind of handles all the stuff for kind of adding the UV to your page and making things like full screen work. A lot of this used to be internal to the UV itself, and I kind of broke it out into this in version 3 into this helpers file so that you've got kind of control over that, how you resize the UV and everything. 9 times out of 10, you probably just want to use the sort of standard out of the box setup, but this gives you the capability to change things. So, for example, the UV now generates various events. So UV3 introduced this kind of external API, which before that it was kind of a black box. It was in an iframe, and you added it to your page, and it read it internally. It then looked at the kind of hash parameters. So manifest and like the X, Y, width, height, zoom level, and all of these sorts of parameters. It would look at those itself, and you had no control over that. And in version 3, you've kind of ditched the requirement for the iframe, so it's more a standard kind of JavaScript widget, and it has this external API.
That's awesome.
So you can you can see it being instantiated here. This is the kind of basic kind of thing that's happening. So it's actually copied from the way Vue.js works, where you pass it a object that has a target, which is just a DOM element. So where am I bootstrapping the UV onto what DOM element, like a div? And then you pass the data object, and the data object is, so here's an example. You're passing in this object here, which has got your manifest, triple manifest, your config, which is just a kind of JSON file, and all these kind of like initial parameters like collection index, manifest index, canvas index, rotation, things like that. And as I said, this is now happening kind of outside of the UV, and the UV makes this URL data provider object available, but you could easily write your own data provider that gets the parameters from elsewhere. So you're not sort of tied to a particular hash parameters based method of controlling the UV and etc.
And can you just remind us the status of the version 3? Is that released, or is it?
It's beta at the moment. So the project, it kind of moves very quickly, and it's another thing that Stanford have been asking for actually is, when can we have a stable release? And I'm kind of hoping that the conference will be an opportunity to kind of agree among the British Library and the various stakeholders what is a stable release. And then we can kind of say, right, it's these features, and that's version 3 stable, and then we'll move on from there. So as I said, it's quite internal project driven, Universal Viewer, and I'm trying to kind of raise the kind of awareness of the need to think more of the UV as a project itself. So hopefully we'll be having some kind of stable release in the next sort of like month or two. But like I said, I'm doing a lot at the moment for the British Library and for Stanford, and it's moving very quickly, and they're adding new features. So it's impossible really to kind of pin it down to anything at the moment.
Yeah, no, I didn't mean to pressure you. I just
no. I'm keenly aware of this problem. But yeah, the UVCon's coming up at the end of March, and I think that's a natural kind of point. And what precipitated the conference is because Stanford have got some very big changes they want to make around search. we decided that we had to have some kind of conference. It's too big a change to be done kind of unilaterally. We have to kind of start documenting these user stories and sitting around a table together and discussing them. So if I made such a big change, obviously there are other stakeholders who would be affected by that. And we have a user stories repository now, which has been quite popular, I think. So people are starting to, so you can see the Stanford UX proposals in there, but that's kind of starting to fill up with user stories. And the goal is for the conference that if we're discussing it, it has to be in this format. That one looks like, I think this one's just a PDF at the moment, but there are other ones. Nope. I think there are ones that have, as a museum, I want to be able to do blah, 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 sort of format.
Yeah.
So we're trying to stick to that kind of way of doing things. We have a template actually on UV's issues as well now, which I think sometimes people use. So maybe this one. Yeah, here we go. And I'm trying to drive traffic to Stack Overflow as well. This is part of the, if it's a support request, it'd be amazing to get everyone using Stack Overflow on the IIIF tag. I think people are starting to do that now. Yeah, so after Toronto, we decided in Toronto this was the way to go. And people like Jack and Jason Ronaldo and Mark Matienzo have been creating sort of some boilerplate kind of issues to kind of get the ball rolling. So,
so we're getting close to our halfway point. I wonder if we should start looking at some of the structure of the code base a little bit and zoom it out.
Sure. So we've got this helpers file, and we can listen to events from the UV and respond to those. So when the collection, say when the canvas index changes, when I do this, there's this value here, canvas equals 3 is getting updated, and that's happening via this UV on canvas index change event. And then it's this URL data provider is then setting that value. And you can call uv.set as well and pass it a data object, which we'll look at now actually. So where it all kind of starts, let's close that. So this is kind of where it all starts, uv component.ts, and this extends this base component. So I've been trying to kind of componentize the UV as much as possible. You can see my sort of first attempts at this in IIIF Commons. So we've got things like metadata component and manifesto and manifold and tree component and gallery. And this is sort of my own home-rolled kind of component system that I've tried to model on stuff like Vue.js, where you've got the target and the data object. But historically, I've been quite apprehensive about buying into any particular kind of front-end framework. I've always been slightly dubious about that, probably because of my own personality. I don't know why, but when I started building the UV, I think AngularJS was probably the big one at the time, and I wasn't super keen on AngularJS, and then React came out, and I was much more keen on that. But at that point, I kind of started building the UV a particular way, and I've never quite liked the idea of having to buy into a particular kind of framework. So I've been trying to stick to really simple kind of jQuery kind of approaches for things and jQuery templating. But I know that that's probably not the future. And one of the things we're going to talk about at the UVCon is how to improve that situation. So one thing I've worked on as a sort of proof of concept is this IIIF Explorer, which is built with Stencil.js. And I'll just briefly explain. So Stencil is a TypeScript-based sort of system where you build your component, and it's borrowed some concepts from React and some from Angular, and you build your component using quite a sort of terse TypeScript format, using decorators to say whether or not something's a prop or a state or an event, things like that. And then you build it, and you get a web component out, and some kind of vanilla kind of JavaScript to power that web component. So when I heard about this, I thought I like that. That's great, because it means I can use a really nice kind of component system, and it's building standards-based stuff at the end of the day. And it means I can kind of adopt a kind of a piecemeal approach to moving the UV forward generally, without having to buy into a kind of runtime framework like React. So that's the kind of thinking at the moment, to start integrating, to convert these existing components over to Stencil, and then have them as web components. But at the moment we've got this kind of jQuery component system, and the UV itself is based off of that. So it's inheriting this base component, which is on IIIF Commons. And when it kind of initializes, it's setting up. So there's a concept of extensions, which you can see here. So we've got sort of 6 extensions. C Dragon extension is the one that you're seeing here. So it's using Open C Dragon for the sort of zoomy bit. But there's one for PDFs, which I'm actually working on at the moment. And there's a new AV extension, which is what I'm working on for the British Library, to sort of improve the audiovisual functionality. I can demo that at the end if there's a bit of time. And there's a 3D extension, which uses this thing called Vertex that I was interested in making a 3D extension, and there were no decent 3D viewers out there, open source ones. So I ended up making one in 3JS, and that's what that uses. So yeah, we've got these different extensions. So when you load the manifest, so these are kind of being created as a dictionary here. So the extension is being, so you can see, like, here's a sort of dictionary item. So it's mapping a kind of a physical object to the vertex extension, or it's mapping a sound to the media element extension, PDF to the PDF extension. And there are different types of mappings. So there's like, so you've got kind of mappings based on file type as well. So if it's a JPEG, this is more for like IIIF presentation 3. You've got a JPEG that maps to the Open C Dragon extension. And then, yeah, so this is building up this dictionary. You can see this is the kind of default data object for the UV component. That's where all the kind of default stuff has been set. And here's the sort of set method where you can pass in a new data object. And there are certain sort of properties that will force a reload. So if you're changing the collection or the manifest index, any of these properties, it treats that as a kind of a reload. So it kind of rebootstraps the UV based on the new data object. Otherwise, if you're only setting something like the canvas index, then it's like, no, I don't need to reload that. I'll just update. So this is the kind of is where, so then, you know, it goes to the reload, empties your div, your target div, and then uses manifold to load the manifest, passing in all the kind of initial parameters that you've set. And every IIIF related kind of action that happens in the UV goes through manifold. So the UV itself is actually, it's all via a kind of interface, the manifold kind of interface. All its interactions with IIIF is kind of oblivious to IIIF in that respect. So if something came along like quadruple IF tomorrow or something like that, then the UV is not kind of tied to any particular thing. So when you load your manifest with manifold, you get a helper object back, and then that's your kind of, that's what the UV is using everywhere to work with IIIF. And this helper object, so manifesto is kind of a stateless library. This is on IIIF Commons as well. You've probably seen it, I think. So manifesto is kind of stateless, kind of get a manifest and pass it into a set of utilities that are useful and kind of deal with malformed manifests and things like that, and kind of normalize it all. So basically, when manifesto loads a manifest now, it's like they're all presentation 3 from the UV's perspective. It all gets kind of normalized, and then manifold wraps manifesto to give you sort of stateful utilities, such as, so it knows like where you are in the manifest, like what the current canvas index is, for example. And I'd really like to use, I've got a Redux example that I've been working on for a kind of a generic IIIF viewer. I'd really like to use that in manifold at some point to have everything work through Redux. And Redux is itself is a kind of a generic thing. It's not tied to React in any way. So that's something else we could talk about at the conference, I think. So manifold loading your manifest, and then it's then, I can show you. So I've got a breakpoint here. So it's loaded, and the extension is null at the moment. This is before it's figured out what to do with this manifest, what extension to use. So if I step through this, it's one of the first thing it does. It's kind of looks for a duration on the canvas. So if your canvas has got a duration property, then it knows that it has to be the AV extension. And then because there's a kind of a load of kind of historical stuff with the UV, with older forms of the presentation API, it has to kind of handle all of those possibilities. But it's in this example, this is a presentation 2 manifest, so it's getting the type, and then it's canvas type is canvas, I think. Yeah. So if we look at the dictionary, you can see canvas maps to UVC Dragon extension, but we could try a different one just to show what happens. So yeah, if I show, this is one of the new AV examples. So extension null, and you can see it's found the duration property, so it's loading the AV extension. And this is kind of interesting. This uses all the kind of same components that the C Dragon extension uses, exactly the same stuff, the metadata panel and everything. Because it's all IIIF-y, it all just kind of works. So yeah, so it's doing some logic and it's finding the extension to use and initializing it. So I can show you the 3D one as well. Just extension null. So it's seeing that this one's got annotations on the, and it's looking at the first canvas in the manifest, by the way. So it's getting the format of the content of the annotation on that canvas, and the format is it's text plain. This example because it's an OBJ file and that's its MIME type, unfortunately. But then if it doesn't find an extension for that, then it's looking at the type of the annotation, and that comes through as physical object. And then it's like, okay, I know what that is. That's a 3D thing. So it loads the where's that? And this is the 3JS thing I've been building. Quite excited about this because you can see the kind of sort of surface texture of things. It's also got WebVR support now, which is kind of cool. So yeah, it's finding its extension and it's initializing it, create extension, and it's kind of passing it the data object that you initialized it with, the helper object that Manifold returned, and reference to the global kind of UV component itself. And then you're into this sort of territory where you have your, say, UVC Dragon extension. And that is extending, because it's kind of TypeScript and we've got this kind of classes system, we can extend things. So it's extending, all of the extensions extend base extension, and that's in UV Shed module. And this does as much kind of generic stuff as possible. So you don't have to, each extension inherits this, so you don't have to kind of duplicate any functionality if you can avoid it. So there's lots of sort of stuff around keyboard events and lots of sort of event handlers, and it's kind of, the UV uses a sort of global pub sub system. So this is subscribing to this login event here, and elsewhere in the system it's kind of $publishing that event.
Is that the jQuery plugin that you use for that?
Yeah, it's I forked it. I think, what's it called? jQuery tiny pub sub, I think. Oh, hang on. How do I search my repositories?
Yeah.
That's global.
I think you have to click on where it says repositories 111.
Yeah.
And then
jQuery tiny pub sub. So I found some bugs with this actually and forked it. I think it's by Cowboy, the guy that made Grunt. So I made a few small changes to it, but yeah, that's what that's using. So yeah, and then all of the events are kind of strictly typed. So they're all in this kind of base events class. And each extension has its own events class that has its kind of extension specific events, like C Dragon extension needs to know about things like rotation and zooming and things like that. So there's quite a lot of kind of event handling stuff going on. And it's creating some sort of generic kind of modules here, like your auth dialog, auth dialogues, and which could be useful across multiple extensions. And it has some code for kind of loading your dependencies for your extension. So the UV only loads the libraries that it needs for the extension, the current extension. So if it's the UVC Dragon extension, it will load OpenC Dragon for you. And that's specified in this Dependencies.js file. And you can just use their kind of their sort of name in that way. You don't have to kind of specify. There's a config.js file where it's specifying the full path to it in node modules, but you just need to use the don't need to use a fully qualified name in dependencies. You can see OpenC Dragon being loaded there, being set there. The UV used to use Bower as well, and that was kind of a hangover from when people thought used node npm for server-y node modules and Bower for sort of client-side modules, and then everyone realized you don't need to use two package managers. So I switched the UV just to use the npm for everything. So yeah, you specify your dependencies in here. You can also set there's an async type dependency, and you can specify sync one as well. So if you made that sync, it would load each of these in order, and that's really useful because that might need something that's in there, or it'll throw like some sort of runtime exception. And you can mix those up. You can have async and synchronous ones. So yeah, and you can see these are all just like components from IIIF Commons that have been loaded up, and a lot of the extensions use these same components, plus OpenC Dragon. So yeah, look at another one. So Vertex. This is mixing sync and async. This stuff that won't work unless 3JS is already loaded. But there's various kind of things for loading different types of 3D files. So back in base extension, that's kind of where all that's happening, and it's using require.js for that. I actually had an interesting time. We're reintroducing PDF.js into the UV. I think Damien and I were both quite pleased to get rid of that and use PDF object instead, because it's kind of a wart on the code base. There's all kinds of stuff, baggage that came along with it. But Stanford are keen to use it again. But we realized that, I won't show you now, but you can use PDF.js almost like it's OpenC Dragon and use all the same kind of user interface. So you can go next, 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 and it will load the next page in the PDF rather than just scrolling and things like that, which is kind of nice. But what we're doing is PDF.js has its own sort of viewer that's written for it, but we realize we don't have to use that viewer. We can kind of make our own viewer, and there are some examples out there for how to do that. So that's what I'm working on at the moment. But I needed to get PDF.js to load using require.js, and PDF.js has its own kind of setup for require.js, where you have to use a specific name that they've kind of hard coded. So there's now a system in the UV to kind of get around that. where you can. It was suffice to say it was difficult, but yeah, if you're using a library that has its own defined module name in it, you can do that now too. So yeah, this is where the kind of dependency loading and stuff is happening. And for every time it loads a dependency, it'll publish an event, so you can kind of respond to that if you need to. Yeah, there's kind of a bunch of kind of boilerplate stuff happening.
It seems like it's been a pretty big rewrite for you.
Version 3?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I think we're in a good place though to go forward with. What I'd really like to do is start kind of each of these components like metadata and gallery and everything is kind of make them into web components, see if we can get them to work, and then hopefully over time we'll get more and more web componenty until the UV itself is a web component. I think we're on track to be able to do that now. Yeah. What else can I talk about? So this is the UVC Dragon extension that's extending base extension. Actually, base extension. I wanted to talk about the kind of base view class. So every kind of piece of UI, like you know, this sense. So there's a shell which specifies the kind of header panel, footer panel, left panel, center panel, all these bits.
I saw that shell being included and I wondered what it was.
Right. So this kind of sets up all the really fundamental kind of bits of DOM that you can that your extension can put stuff into. So if we look at C Dragon extension, it's importing all these different bits of so paging header panel here is coming in from modules, paging header panel, and I recently updated everything to use ES6 imports instead of TypeScript kind of system, which is a bit more. Ideally, I'd like to get to the point where everything is kind of. I think everything is now kind of ES6 style as much as possible. So you can see like the header panel here. I'm sort of saying that's a type paging header panel, and then that will be getting created. There's tons of create modules. Every extension has a kind of create modules method, and then if header panel is even enabled, so you could turn it off in config, create a new paging header panel model, paging header panel module. Yeah, on that part of the shell. And then there's various like dialogues and things that are only really specific to this extension. Download dialog. So you see download dialog. That's being scrolling. That's being imported from here. So download dialog. That's coming from here, which is extending base download dialog. So there's a fair amount of kind of inheritance going on just to kind of avoid duplication. And then so each extension has its own download dialog that extends base download dialog. And this one itself is particularly, for the OpenC Dragon one, is especially complex. It's like an application in its own right. I'd like to make this into a component as well at some point, and with its own test suite. That's one of the great things about Stencil, is that it uses JSX, which is really nice, which I'm a fan of, and you can use Jest which is also kind of a React type library to test things. So I'm keen for every component to have its own separate test suite, be independently sort of versionable. But that's going to take a long time to get to that point. So yeah, you can see that even just this download dialog is quite a complex kind of thing. I'm sure there are many community calls where Damien has helped me try and figure out what to do with this thing. So each thing that goes, so you've got your shell, and then each thing that goes in this shell extends base view. And base view, when I initially designed the UV, I really wanted to avoid using CSS as much as possible. I didn't really trust CSS to kind of do important layout stuff with. So what kind of happens with the UV, you have the window resizes, and then like the outermost sort of thing of the UV, the component or whatever, or base extension, I think, detects that resize event, and then that the extension resizes, and then it goes down a level, and everything within the shell resizes, and everything within each of those bits then resizes. So it's kind of, and when things resize, they're just looking at their parent DOM element to see what size that is and adjusting to that. And I copied that from the way Microsoft's XAML system works, because I'd done quite a lot of XAML prior to the UV project, and yeah, the idea of using CSS hacks to position things, I was just not up for it at all. So that I found that actually to be really bulletproof. Actually, over the years, it's stood up pretty well. But I'm not kind of avoiding CSS entirely. I use less. It's possible that we should. Stencil.js uses Sass, which is not massively different, really. I'm only using less. I'm not using any of the really advanced stuff, I don't think. So it's probably okay to port that over if necessary. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff going on with less files. So if we look at maybe this one, the CSS is, everything's kind of, I tried to keep everything structured sensibly so that all the CSS for this for this module is in here. And when you build the UV, it's each extension has a theme that's importing each of these less files, and that's how they're all getting kind of built together. So you can see it. It's just sort of standard stuff, really. But I make an effort to try and keep the CSS as easy to understand as possible, and not to do any real kind of sort of layout heavy lifting with it. Just give things padding and margin and stuff like that. Yeah. So yeah, base view is what's handling this resizing stuff, and it also it gives you access to the kind of localization, or the localization sort of text strings and the config for your particular bit of UI. So look at the Dragon center panel.
And I'm just going to interrupt to let you know that we're nearly done here with our time. Just a couple minutes left. So if there's anything you want to quickly finish with or make sure to mention.
Well, so we're just we're saying set config pseudo and center panel, and that's what ties it up to its extensions respective localization data and config. And that's all just like JSON files. So it can, because it's C Dragon center panel, you just need to look in here, and there's your config for C Dragon center panel. I think that's, it's not, I don't think it's everything, but that's fairly, that's all right. It's kind of first look, I think. Unless anyone have any questions at all?
I think it's a great whirlwind tour.
Yes, thank you very much.
No worries.
Thank you, Ed.
I'm going to stop recording and then people can ask questions for the last couple of minutes.